Welcome to Formed, where each week we navigate a relevant topic or question through honest conversations. We are three pastors with three different backgrounds on staff together at Irving Bible Church in Irving, Texas. We believe we are constantly being formed in the way of Jesus for the sake of the world, and we hope this podcast helps with that. So let's jump into this week's episode of Formed. Welcome back to another week of Formed, and today, Sissy, you moved over. You moved seats on the couch.
This is the Barry seat. I feel special.
Are you you don't have the Bilbo Baggins notebook,
I don't.
though.
No.
You have an iPad.
Yeah.
You're kind of cheating.
Well, I'm not going to say what I am. I'm going to get in trouble.
If you guys didn't listen to last week, we had Dr. Glahn on, Dr. Sandra Glahn, and she talked about her new upcoming book. It was a lot of fun for us to talk with her, and a lot of people have reached out about that episode. So if you missed that episode, go back, listen to last week with Dr. G. She's pretty awesome. Today, we are 3 weeks out from Barry returning from sabbatical.
Just about.
I was thinking about it the other day. I'm like, we haven't, if you're an IBCer listening to this, we haven't really talked about it from stage in a while. That like, hey, Barry's on sabbatical, you know? Barry's
he's coming back.
Living it up in Italy with the family and doing all the fun stuff. But he'll be back in roughly 3 weeks on the podcast. And today, we were talking about, we're going through a bunch of subjects. Some subjects we're waiting and you guys reached out on that you want us to talk about. And we're like, all right, I think we're going to save that for Barry. We'll save this one for Barry. And we're talking about subjects, and Caroline, who's in the booth, she threw out, she's like, hey, what if you talk about the difference of what Christianity or what being a believer looks like in, the Northeast versus the South? You both have kind of these different backgrounds, but now we both live in Texas. So, let's just start there. Of what? First of all, let's zoom out for a second. Why is it important why is it a danger? Let's say this. Why is it a danger for us to kind of define Christianity and what being a believer looks like based off just what you grew up in?
So let me say two things. One thing, can I give us a disclaimer before I answer that question?
I mean, maybe.
Because I want to make sure that this is clear, that we're having a conversation and we're sharing a lot of our experiences. Yeah. Right? And so it's opinions, it's experiences. We're going to make observations, but they're really broad generalizations. Even as we talk about the North, like for me, when I talk about the North, I'm talking about Northeast. Yeah. And when I talk about the South, I'm talking about Dallas, which isn't all of the South. So there's certainly room for differences.
It's not even all of Texas.
No, it's not even all of Texas. Exactly. That's very true. So there's room for differences depending on the context. Yeah. Now, getting to your question, I think that's a good question to think about, not even just where do you live geographically, but we talked about earlier, it could be where you grew up. It could be your ethnicity, the experiences that you've had that oftentimes, and this is true of all of us, we see the world through our own narrow lens. So how do we learn how to be curious and to open up our perspectives to there's another way of seeing this? And I think particularly when it comes to understanding God, we need all those different perspectives to understand all the facets of who God is. Yeah.
For me, I've mentioned on this podcast before, but I'm probably not going to go too deep into it. But for me, that different perspective was political parties.
Right.
Of growing up, small town Kentucky, there's pretty much, there's only one political party. It's like, hey, everybody's conservative, everybody thinks a certain way, and Christianity equals this political party. Right. And it wasn't until I started getting older and I started going different places and having different experiences and seeing different perspectives, and it's like, whoa, okay, Christianity can happen in these different spaces.
You can be whatever and still be a Christian.
Exactly.
Political affiliation.
You don't have to vote a certain way based off. So let's talk about this for a second. Let's talk about our upbringings and what did being a believer look like for you growing up, and then I'll go after that.
Yeah, so mine's a little bit unique because I grew up Indian American, so grew up in an Indian church, an ethnic church, but also growing up in the North, or Northeast in particular, where I think what's really unique is what I've seen, one of the differences I've seen between growing up in the Northeast and then growing up here in Dallas is religious identity isn't, at least not one of the top priorities in terms of your identity. So I might identify myself, or if you grow up in the Northeast, you might say, well, I'm Italian American or Indian American, or here's, I grew up in this area, or this is the job I do, this is school I went to. Religious identity, if it comes up so much further down the list. And I think that's what's really unique. So for me, being a Christian there, I had to really know what I believed, and I had to be willing to stand up for it. So like one of the examples I might give is when I was in corporate, I would have in my office just like Post-it notes with Bible verses on it. That was really just for me, just as a way of keeping God's word on my mind and centering myself on Scripture throughout the day.
As you looked out over like your corner office over Manhattan.
I did not have that, no. But oftentimes people would come into my office, especially people who were meeting for the first time, and one of the first things they'd talk about were those verses, because it was so rare to do something like that. And I wasn't doing it as a way of like, well, let me put my Bible verse up so we could talk about it. It really was for me, but it would often lead to some really great conversations. Whereas like here in Dallas, it's a really small example of, I don't think that would be such a big deal. Because
like, oh, you only have one verse? Okay.
Right. Like you didn't get that sign from Hobby Lobby?
Yeah.
Christianity, there's such a strong evangelical Christian influence here.
Yeah.
And growing up in the Northeast, there's a lot of religious diversity. There's a lot of ethnic diversity, which often leads to religious diversity. So people believe in so many different faiths. You could even be Christian and you could be Catholic. There's a huge Catholic population. You could be Orthodox. So the influence of evangelical Christianity that you experience here in the South, I didn't experience as much in the North. I think what that led to was there's a lot more skepticism. And I wouldn't, a lot of people talk about the Northeast in terms of doubt. I'm not sure I've experienced it as doubt, as more of, but more of like intellectual curiosity, where people are like, well, why do you believe that? Tell me more about that. And that's kind of, I haven't experienced a lot of hostility in the North. It was more of, like, you're pretty smart. Why would you believe in Jesus and this Christian faith? Tell me about that. And so that's kind of what I experienced. I think the other thing about that is people are quick to tell you, yeah, I just don't believe what you believe, or I don't believe anything, and they're very direct about it. So whereas in the South, I think more of what I've experienced is oftentimes your faith can become more cultural. Yeah. So this is the church I grew up in, or I go to church every Sunday because that's what I've always done, and that's what my family did. You don't get that in the North as much. So I'm not saying it never happens, but that's not as prevalent as I think it is here.
Yeah, and in the South, or in Kentucky, it wasn't a why. You don't have to ask why, because it's just part of...
That's what you do.
That's just what you do. Yeah. Like, it's part of your lifestyle. We were joking the other day of, if somebody comes over to the house, when I was growing up, and it was, after you do the names, oh, all right, yeah, what do you do? Where do you work?
Yeah, it's part of your identity.
They're talking about it, and then it's just, just a given. So, yeah, where do y'all go to church?
Uh-huh.
And you were laughing, you're like, that would never be a question.
We would never ask that, yeah.
And so it's just, schedules built around
church,
Wednesday night and Sunday morning. Yeah. Practice schedules, for teams. There ain't nobody practicing on a Wednesday night, anything, because that's church night. It's just, praying before things at school and stuff like that. It's just part of the lifestyle for me growing up, or, how it was there. And I think about it from that perspective too, of, I wonder what it would have been like for me if I had to work for it a little harder.
Yeah.
Like, work for it a little harder in the sense of understanding what, if I wasn't engulfed in it all the time, there wasn't an expectation. It wasn't something that you just lived in all the time.
Yeah.
How that would change, if it would change, like, my upbringing.
Yep.
And
yeah, I think So I think the way I'd put it is like, and I might have said this earlier, you really have to know what you believe, and you have to be willing to stand up for it, because people are going to ask you about it, and they're going to question it. It's not given that makes sense that you follow Jesus. And I think that is one of the differences. I kind of like that because it really did make me think about, do I believe in this because this is what my parents believe, or this is how I grew up, or is this actually real for me? Like, is it a genuine relationship I have with Jesus? I spent a good amount of my college years figuring out, I'm not sure I believe in this, or if this is just what I've always been taught. This is kind of the water I swam in, and so I'm believing it, or do I truly believe Jesus is the Son of God, and this is who God is, and do I have this relationship? Which I'm not sure I would have thought about in that way if I hadn't grown up in the Northeast like that.
Yeah. On worldpopulationreview.com, and back in 2000, I say back in, this is way back, guys, back in April 2023, they did a survey where they had an update to their least religious states in the U.S. Would you want to take a guess, or do you just want to name all the Northeast states and see which one's in order?
Least religious?
Least religious. There's 4 states in the 30% percentile. New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Vermont, and Maine.
I was going to say Maine. Yeah.
And then after that, you're looking at Connecticut, New York's in there. There's some other ones like Wisconsin, Washington, but Rhode Island. I mean, you're basically Delaware. The Northeast
the whole coast
is
right
going to
there.
be, in the least church. But then you look at the bottom, and the bottom states, 77%. Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Louisiana, Arkansas, South Carolina, keep on going up to Kentucky. So it's kind of like why we're talking about this day of like how, even the physical place of a church. Mm-hmm. I mean, if somebody wanted to play basketball, in high school, it's like, oh, what church is open? Because we have so many churches in my tiny little town. Yeah. It's just wherever you want to turn.
And that's never where you'd go to play basketball in the Northeast. Like that, I'm like, that's what you think about? That's not what we think about there when it comes to church. Like, where can I play basketball? Because they've got the best courts.
Yeah. So, okay, what about hospitality?
Yeah.
How does hospitality look different in the North versus, the Northeast and the South?
So I think some of this is perception, but some of it is, there's some truth to it, and I get why people feel like Southern hospitality is a thing.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is related to the pace of life. So in the North, and I mean, just think about, you go to New York City, right? Everything's fast-paced. People have things to do, places to be. That's what they're focused on. And so there's a tendency to perceive that as being rude or inhospitable. People are very direct, somewhat even blunt, and perhaps harsh. That was one of the first things I learned about moving to Texas, that I can't talk the same way I used to talk in New Jersey.
But even that for a second, I think is so cool. Like, because in the South, I feel like I learned early on. Oh, if we I remember when my dad, when I was super young, and somebody was like rude. Oh, they must be from the North.
Yeah, right. That's the stereotype.
So as a kid, I was like, dang, all Northerners are just
rude.
Yeah. But it's not that.
No, it really isn't.
Being blunt or being honest doesn't have to be a bad thing.
Yeah. And I would even say, like, I have found such great hospitality, or experienced such great hospitality in the North, but it's just different perhaps than how we might think about it here. So Southerners are warmer and friendlier. Politeness and courtesy, that's like a whole thing here that is very different than in the North, because they're just like, I got things to do. I've got this thing I'm trying to accomplish, and I want to get after it. I think in the South also, there's a greater sense of, like, maybe I'd call it connection. So, like, here's my example. The first time I came to Dallas, it wasn't even when I moved here. It was probably like 15 years ago. And I go to Target and picking up some things on some. I think I came here for a wedding, and I was shocked because the cashier started talking to me about what I was buying. I had never experienced that.
Leave me alone.
Why are you talking to me about my toothpaste? And I didn't know what to do with that. And now when I go back to New Jersey and they don't want to make small talk with me, I feel like they've been rude, right? Because I'm so used to, like, that's what we do. We say hi, we smile, we talk. You don't do that in the Northeast. You're just getting your stuff and you're leaving.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of it is pace of life. Now, I do think that's changing some here, even here in Dallas, where influx of transplants from the North or even West Coast, and then even increase in immigration has changed how pace of life, and a lot more businesses coming to particularly the DFW area just because of lower costs and things like that, and economic incentives. Yeah. So I think a lot of that is changing in some ways. I wonder if 20 years from now, how different that will look, like what we'd say about this same conversation. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of that does have to do with pace of life.
What about evangelism? Because I think when I look at this and I say, I think it might be easy for somebody to listen to this that's, lives in Texas, and they're like, all right, well, it doesn't seem fun to live in the North. Yeah. This seems much easier. But I think in that easiness, it kind of going back to the beginning, it requires you, like, to evangelize. You're going to get questions of, like, why? Like, it's going to challenge you. I feel like if I moved to the Northeast right now, I feel like I would just need to dive back into my commentaries and everything, and like, all right, I got to really know my stuff even more, because it's not the norm.
Yeah.
And so, like, how do you see evangelism, like, look different in the South versus the Northeast?
Yeah. So for me, and I might be the minority in saying this, and
you're representing everybody.
I am representing everybody. I speak for everybody in the Northeast. For me, it's actually easier. And here's why I say that. Here's what I like about it, or the difference I found. So in the North, people are really direct about, here's what I believe, here's what I don't believe. You know where they stand. It's really clear. And people, it's not weird for someone to tell you, yeah, I don't believe in God. I'm an atheist. I've met lots of people who have said that to me for a variety of reasons. Whereas here in the South, it's so much ingrained in our culture. So there's such a strong influence of evangelical Christianity that it becomes, you gotta almost have to weed through, okay, hold on. Is this cultural for you? Is this just part of tradition and how you grew up or what your family did? Or do you have this genuine relationship with Jesus? Whereas I feel like it's so much more clear if you're in the Northeast. I at least know where you stand. So then I can think about, okay, how are we going to have this conversation? And the second thing is, I think there really is, I think deep inside every human being is a desire to know God. And because of that, I think in the Northeast, there is this intellectual curiosity and skepticism. I might not agree with you or believe in what you're saying, but I at least want to know about it.
Yeah.
And so it's just, I've had so many opportunities just to say, can I just tell you what I believe? Can I just tell you my story? Here's what God's done in my life. And people are willing to listen. Whereas I feel like it's a little bit harder in the South, at least for me, to figure out where are you exactly when it comes to faith. And so it takes a little bit more work. Does that make sense?
Did you inherit this? Or
is this what your parents taught you and what you've always done?
That's true.
That kind of thing.
What about church? Is it just because, hey, it's the least church up there, or more Christians down here that we have bigger churches, that there's more, quote, mega churches in the South versus the North? Why are there more, and I could be wrong, it feels like there's more smaller churches in the Northeast?
I think that's generally true in the Northeast. One, I think there's a lot more religious diversity. Ethnic diversity leads to religious diversity, which means mainline Christianity, evangelical Christianity isn't the dominant faith. So there's lots of different faiths. I think about a New York City subway car, and you first of all, you're going to hear a variety of languages, people dressed in all sorts of different clothing. And I think if we took a survey, you'd find a number of different religions, including none. Yeah. And so I think the religious diversity as well as just that has led to it's much more secular and much more pluralistic. So you can believe in a number of different things. So that leads to a greater unchurched. I think when you think about the megachurch, so megachurches, not always, but typically are built around a particular personality, celebrity pastor. Have you heard about that? And that doesn't, I'm not saying it never happens in the Northeast, because it does, but it's not as prevalent. And I think that's related to when you look back on the 19th, 20th century and Enlightenment, the Northeast was really the center of where the Enlightenment movement took off in the United States. And so there's this focus on intellectual curiosity, critical thinking, valuing education, which stands in sharp contrast to faith. So they're almost like opposites. So because of that, that influence of the church has in many ways declined, I think. So I think that leads to more unchurched, less megachurch kind of thing. So you have that as well, that I think leads to, that's not where people find community. Yeah. So when you think of community here, one of the first places, just like you said before, if we want to play basketball, we're going to go to a church. That is not what you think when you're in the Northeast, because that's not where people necessarily find their community. So what megachurches have offered is this sense of belonging and community. You can find everything you want by just going to this one place. Yeah. Whereas in the Northeast, they're finding that in different ways. You have the same need, because we all have this innate need for one another. That's how we're created. Yeah. But they're not finding it in the church necessarily. And I think that's actually an opportunity for the church in the Northeast.
That's good. How, we were talking about this last question, how did you want to word that again? Of how can we, if we're setting back from these kind of different perspectives, how can we grow, how can we be formed through these different lenses that...
Yeah, I think I was thinking about it in terms of how do you share your faith? So in terms of evangelism and outreach. So for me, like one of the things that I have learned that has been so beneficial of growing up in the Northeast and also living here for a number of years is it's really taught me to, when I'm wanting to share my faith with somebody, instead of, a lot of times you could focus on here's what I have to say and here's what I need to get across. But beginning with establishing that relationship and really trying to understand that person. Yeah. So thinking about who they are, where they came from, and not even just, did they grow up in New York City, although that does matter, or did they grow up in Kentucky? But even what kind of family did they come from? What needs are they trying to get met? We all have the same innate needs. Yeah. Right? Like deep inside of us is this desire for God, is this desire to be in relationship with God and with one another. But we look for that in so many different ways. So like I'm always trying to figure out what need are you trying to get met? And then how does the gospel address that? And if I could think about it like that, that's a better way for me to have a conversation with somebody. So I think that's like really beneficial to me to think about just being curious about someone else's story, what drives them, and then thinking about that in terms of, now how can I share my faith with that person? Yeah. Does that make sense?
No, it does. And, I go back to, or we do a full circle back to the beginning of, the differences of, whether it's denominations, political parties, areas of the United States, but finding the similarities, that we focus so much on the differences, and we don't really, and it's that whole like major on the major, minor on the minor type stuff, that we can fall so much into that trap of, well, we're like being hospitable in the South, that's the right way.
Yes, right.
It's like,
or doing it this way is hospitality.
Exactly. Doing it this way is hospitality. And it's like we don't get to define what that looks like. Right. And I've come to appreciate so much that of what Christianity looks like in the Northeast, because you got to want it. Right. Like it's not going to be spoon-fed to you like it was, like it is for a lot of us in the South. Yeah. That it's just like part of the lifestyle. You got to want it more, and it's going to require a little bit more of, going after it. And I respect that.
Yeah. And I think that's going to happen more in the South as well. Like as we, like I said, like we have so much more immigration that leads to religious diversity. We have all kinds of faiths right in Irving, between temples and mosques and all of that. So I think more and more we're going to have to experience that as well in the South, with just greater pluralistic thinking, greater secularism, diversity of religion, all of that.
Yeah. even how you pronounce words in New Jersey. And
I was going to say...
How do you say chocolate?
It's chocolate. Even when I say it now, so before, I spent enough time here to know that sounds weird, but I don't know how to say it differently.
It's pecan.
Pecan.
Pecan
pie. Come on.
Okay. So there's that conversation. Thanks for having that. That
was fun.
I do think it is a thing for all of us to think about how you formed what, in your mind, what Christianity and what being a believer looks like.
Yeah.
And to regularly like challenge that look at it and like, all right, why do I think this way? Why do I think my way is right?
Right.
And why is that?
Yeah. How do you stay curious?
Yeah. How do you stay curious on that?
Good.
So, okay. At the end of each episode, we have some fun with it. And
we do.
I came across this article a little while back, and it's about, because I came across the article because I Googled it because I heard that hot sauce right now is just skyrocketing in some prices online. And I'm like, why is a bottle of, am I saying it right? Sriracha?
That's right.
Bingo.
I mean, as far as I know, what do I know? I think it sounds right.
You represent everybody. You represent Texans too. But bottles of Sriracha is going for upwards to $120 some places online because there is a drought in Mexico that is resulting in a scarcity of chili peppers, in particular red jalapenos in the raw material Sriracha. So it is like causing this, this drought.
Yeah.
Is making this hot sauce like.
So during the pandemic it was toilet tissue, and now we're doing Sriracha.
Would you pay $120
for Sriracha?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'd pay $120, but I would pay some good money for Sriracha. Like, hot sauce is very vital in my life.
You put it on everything?
I put it on everything. I love hot sauce, all different kinds.
Me
depending
too.
on what it is. Like, I'll switch up my hot sauce.
You switch up the hot sauce?
Oh, yeah. Like, sometimes you do need, like, some just Frank's Red Hot. Sometimes you need Sriracha. Sometimes there's, like, an Indian hot sauce that I use that I really enjoy. Just depends.
We have a guy on staff who just, like, it feels like he carries around that bottle of hot sauce.
Everywhere.
All the time. And I'm like, I guess I need to start doing that.
So my family kind of does that when we go out to eat. Like
you carry a bottle of hot sauce inside the restaurant?
Uh-huh. And you just need a little hot sauce.
I feel like that's one of those things where it's like, hey, if you ask for A1 sauce, it's kind of like a shot at
it totally is.
The steak.
Yep.
So
why do you need?
So
you don't tell them about it. You're just like,
you put it in your purse?
Yeah. Come on.
You just carry it's like, cool, got my wallet, my pepper spray, and
here's my hot sauce.
Here's my hot sauce, just to put it on anything.
That's right.
All right. Well, okay. So, question: what are some regular items that you're like, man, if they skyrocket in price, I honestly don't care because I'd pay it.
Okay, the first thing I thought about was coffee. Like coffee, I would definitely. And I think I would do that not just for me, but for everyone else around me. It's vital that I have coffee. So that was like that's the first one I thot about.
I didn't start drinking coffee until I worked here.
And you still just drink milk with a drop of coffee. So let's not say you drink coffee.
It's kind of true. Milk.
Milk.
I'm drinking milk right now.
Do you drink milk all the time?
I do. I drink a lot of milk. It's one of those things where like I'll see the price,
milk
somebody
is expensive.
Somebody will post about it and be like, oh my gosh, milk is, I don't know, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I don't even say, I say whatever it is, not because I will always pay it.
Right.
I don't care. I will sacrifice.
It's not for your kids. It's for you.
Yes.
That's why.
I will not buy bread or something if I have, I will buy milk. Milk could go up to $10 a gallon.
Right.
Sign me up.
And you need milk just to drink it, not because you're baking a cake or whatever.
I mean, you can always use milk for stuff, but yes, I like to just put it in a glass and drink it.
Wow,
I have some right now. And
you do.
I'm basically like a cat. It's just like drinking milk.
Or a 5-year-old. Like you and your kids are at the same level with your milk drinking.
They love... So
do they like milk?
In Portuguese, yes. In Portuguese, it's leche. So all the time, they're always leche, and cereal and so...
Yeah, I don't drink a whole lot of milk except in my coffee.
Do you eat cereal?
I don't really eat cereal.
Oh my gosh.
Anymore. I used to, like when I was a child.
Oh, here we go. When I was 5, I ate cereal. No,
cereal is good. I'm
what
not
do you
against
eat for
cereal.
breakfast? Bagels?
No, I have a protein shake that I make myself. Okay, I'm not buying protein shakes. I make my own.
It's like
and I used almond milk, so I do use a kind of milk, just not.
You're bougie. Is there another item that you're like, hey, this is kind of cheap, but I would always buy it?
This is sort of nerdy.
Oh, no.
But the only other thing I thought about that would really matter in my life, not the only other thing, but the second thing I thought about was books. Like, if I didn't have books, I'd be really, I don't know what I would do. I really enjoy books. And I would pay, I think books are kind of cheap here, right? At least in the United States. But I would pay a lot of money. Like, if there was some kind of, where we get into some kind of totalitarian regime where they cut off all opportunity to read, I'd pay money for that. That'd be like black market for me, what I'd go to.
You're like risking it all.
Yeah, for books.
For a new book.
That was my second one. I couldn't think of another.
I know.
I'm sure there's lots of things.
I know. There's different things that I think about. I'm like, all right, shoes. I love shoes, but...
Nikes.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
That's not necessarily cheap.
I know. Some of their prices are still just keep on going up. But then I started thinking about just what are some everyday items?
Yeah.
I mean, a toothbrush, there's nothing better than having like
you need a toothbrush.
A fresh set of teeth that's been brushed.
You do need a toothbrush. That's true.
It's like I would probably pay a little bit more for that, but I don't know. There's a lot of things out there. I could go the food route, but that wouldn't be entertaining.
No, you would say like peanut butter or something.
I do like peanut butter.
Yeah, peanut butter is good. I do like peanut butter too.
Have you had? I was watching the Bachelorette the other night, and
we're not going to pause there.
Have you had like spicy jelly?
Like
they put like this like jelly salsa type thing on a chip and ate it, and they were talking about how good it was, and I just can't figure out if I like that combination.
I've had that with like brie. Okay. Now I've like taken it up a notch for you. So
why are you eating brie cheese?
Because it's so good.
How many different cheeses do you have in your house? Do you like buy a bunch of them?
Right now I don't have a lot, but if I'm having people over, there's probably cheese involved.
Okay.
At least 2. You gotta have some variety.
I can't imagine, like when I have people over, I put like
you're like I got a brisket on or something.
Yeah, I got like a brisket on, or like there's chips, or I've made like some like sliders for people to eat,
which is
like,
great. I would have that too, but I
don't
also
like,
have cheese.
Hey, here's the cheese board.
Yeah, you need a charcuterie.
Do you want a glass for the wine? I've had it fermenting for 60 years.
You do not have wine fermenting for 60 years, but okay.
Okay.
This has gone off the deep end.
I know. Barry, I hope Barry listens to this one.
Us.
Yeah, he would have been hitting the chair and his face would be red. All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening to another week of Foreign. We'll be back next week as we count down to Barry returning. See ya.